Let me ask you something simple. Do you believe a dance without music can speak to the deepest part of a child's heart and forever change the life of the one who danced? In a world where noise fills every space, sometimes the most powerful moments arrive in silence. And sometimes the smallest gesture, done for no audience with no applause, can echo louder than any grand performance. If you've ever seen someone do good simply because it was right, if you believe that the most touching acts often happen without a single word, then go ahead, click like, hit subscribe, and stay with us. Because today's story begins with stillness and ends with a folded piece of paper, carrying more weight than 1,000 spoken words. The late afternoon sun spilled its golden light through the windows of Willow Cafe, casting long shadows over the wooden floors and warm-colored booths. The cafe, nestled in a quiet corner of the city, usually buzzed with the clinking of cups and the low hum of conversation. But that day, something was different. In the farthest booth, tucked away in the quietest spot of the restaurant, sat Daniel Rivers, a man most wouldn't recognize in person, though his name carried weight in boardrooms and medical journals across the country. 61 years old, silver-haired but still broad-shouldered, Daniel had built an empire in medical device manufacturing. He was a billionaire many times over, known for his discretion, discipline, and distance from the public eye. Few had ever seen him in a place as ordinary as a neighborhood cafe. Across the table from him sat Evan, his 9-year-old son. Evan was a small, delicate boy with sandy blonde hair and pale blue eyes that rarely met anyone else's. His fingers moved rhythmically around a metal spoon, circling and circling on the surface of the table. He wasn't playing. He wasn't restless. He was regulating, finding order in repetition. Evan was autistic, profoundly nonverbal, and deeply sensitive to sound. Daniel watched him quietly, his own coffee growing cold. He had learned long ago not to force interaction. With Evan, connection came in fleeting glances, in brief moments of calm between the storms of overwhelming stimuli. Today he had hoped for one such moment, just a simple afternoon together, outside the sterile calm of their home. But then the background music started. A soft jazz tune, harmless to most, began playing over the cafe speakers. The saxophone, subtle and low, might have been pleasant under other circumstances. But for Evan, it was too much. He stiffened. His spoon stopped mid-circle. Then came the trembling. Within seconds, his hands flew up to his ears. His eyes widened in panic, darting from corner to corner like a trapped animal. A low moan escaped his lips, followed by a sharp, panicked cry. Daniel leaned in quickly, his voice low but firm. "It's okay, son. I've got you. I'm here." But his words could not reach through the rising wave of anxiety that had already engulfed his boy. Across the room, a waitress froze mid-step. A couple near the counter looked over with startled expressions. But then, without a word, one of the young staff members, barely out of high school, judging by his face, darted behind the counter and hit a small panel on the wall. The music stopped. The sudden silence hit the room like a soft blanket. Conversations quieted. Forks paused in midair. Even the espresso machine seemed to hush. And in the silence, Evan breathed, one slow, shuddering breath. Then another. Daniel reached across the table, placing a hand lightly on Evan's, careful not to startle him. The boy's fingers twitched, then resumed their circular path around the spoon. The panic hadn't vanished, but it had retreated, just enough to restore the fragile balance. Around them, the cafe held its breath. Daniel looked up briefly, catching the eye of the young man behind the counter who had silenced the music. The boy gave a small nod, nothing more. No questions, no explanations. Just quiet understanding. Moments passed. Then life resumed. A couple laughed quietly in a booth near the window. A mother whispered to her toddler, sharing bites of a blueberry muffin. Plates clinked again. And Daniel leaned back in his seat, a long breath escaping his chest, shoulders lowering slightly. But his eyes never left Evan. He thought of the dozens of experts they had seen, the therapy centers, the custom learning plans, the home modifications. He thought of the silence that filled their home, not a peaceful silence, but one charged with longing. Longing to connect, to hear his son's voice, or even a word. He sipped his cold coffee without tasting it. Daniel didn't notice her at first. From across the room, a young woman stood behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour from an earlier kitchen run. She hadn't approached their table. She hadn't said a word. But her eyes had watched it all, the panic, the silence, the spoon returning to its orbit. She didn't rush to help or console or fix. She simply saw. That would come later. For now, the silence remained. And for Daniel Rivers, used to solving everything with resources, power, or influence, it was the first time in a long while that something shifted, not because of what someone said, but because someone knew exactly when to say nothing at all. Her name was Emily Carter, 28 years old, white, a waitress at Willow Cafe for the past 3 years, known by the regulars for her quiet grace and gentle smile. She moved through the cafe like someone who understood rhythm, not just of steps and trays, but of people and moods. Though few knew her story, some sensed there was more to her than the simple apron she wore. Years ago, Emily had been a dancer, modern dance, to be specific. She had trained hard, fought through rejection, and was once on the cusp of joining a respected company in Chicago. But life, as it often does, had other plans. A car accident had taken her mother, left her father in a wheelchair, and forced Emily home to care for a family suddenly shattered. The stage lights went out. The dancing stopped. And for a long time, so did Emily. Until she found herself here. It was supposed to be just another shift. She had watched the scene with the boy and the music from a distance, drying glasses behind the counter. She hadn't intervened. She hadn't even moved closer. But she had seen him, the boy with the wide, frightened eyes and the small, trembling hands, and something deep inside her stirred. She knew that kind of silence. She knew what it meant to have too much inside and not enough space to let it out. The need for stillness. The hunger for safety. The deep, almost cellular craving for one moment of being understood without the need to explain. Evan. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew him. So Emily waited. The cafe slowly returned to normal, but the energy in the room had shifted. Conversations were hushed. Movement softened. People seemed aware, even if they didn't understand why. Emily continued her work, clearing tables, refilling water glasses, taking orders. But she kept one eye on the boy. And something told her the moment wasn't over yet. Then it came. A family near the front left. Their table remained empty, bathed in late golden light. Between the rows of booths, a narrow open space stretched out like an accidental stage. And without thinking, without checking with anyone, Emily stepped into it. She didn't say a word. She didn't announce herself. She didn't ask for attention. She simply began to move. It started with a slow extension of her right arm, as if brushing away invisible dust. Then her left, sweeping across her chest, her fingers trailing through the air like ribbons of breath. She turned slowly, one foot gliding behind the other, as though she were made of air. Her steps were soft, unhurried. There was no music, only silence, and yet each motion followed a rhythm no one else could hear, except maybe one. Daniel noticed her first. He had been watching his son, still cautious, still holding his breath. But then his gaze shifted, and he saw her, this young waitress, suddenly dancing in the middle of his world. He stiffened, confused, almost irritated. What was she doing? Was this some misguided attempt at entertainment? But then, something in her movement made him pause. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't even rehearsed. Her motions weren't about beauty or flair. They were about presence. About being there with him, with Evan, in that very moment. Not demanding anything. Not asking anything. Just moving, like wind brushing the surface of still water. All around them, the cafe fell into a hush. Forks stopped mid-air. Coffee cups remained suspended. No one said a word. And Evan saw her. His spoon slowed, then stopped. His eyes lifted from the tabletop for the first time since they arrived. He looked across the room, directly at her. He didn't flinch. He didn't cover his ears. He simply watched. Emily continued, her body telling a story that didn't need language. A soft twirl. A bowed head. A step backward, as if yielding to something greater. Her hands fluttered, then steadied. She turned again, pausing just slightly, waiting. Her movements mirrored breath. Inhale, exhale, soften, let go. And in that moment, Evan smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't big. It was small, so small that Daniel almost missed it. But it was real. A gentle upward curve of the lips. A flicker of light in the eyes. A shift in posture, his back straighter, his hands no longer clenched. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen that expression on his son's face outside their home. Never in a public place, surrounded by strangers, without any intervention from a therapist or a structured environment. And yet, here it was. Caused by a dance. Caused by a waitress. Caused by silence. Emily slowed her movements, her feet coming to rest in a soft second position. She stood there for a moment, arms gently falling to her sides, and then bowed her head, not to the room, not for applause, but as if grounding herself in the stillness she had helped create. Then, just as quietly, she stepped out of the space and returned to the counter. No words. No acknowledgement. No need. Daniel stared after her, something rising in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, yes. But also awe. And confusion. And hope. Mostly hope. The other patrons began to stir again, slowly returning to their meals. But something had shifted. They had all seen something they couldn't quite name. And for once, they chose not to explain it. They just let it be. Emily returned to her duties as if nothing had happened. She didn't glance back. She didn't ask if it helped. She didn't need to. She had seen the boys smile. That was enough. For now. Emily didn't linger after the dance. She didn't wait for anyone to say anything, didn't look for approval or recognition. She simply turned, picked up a stray napkin from a nearby table, and walked calmly back behind the counter. There, she tied her apron a bit tighter and resumed restocking the glassware as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. To her, perhaps, it hadn't. The room remained hushed for a few minutes longer, the unspoken memory of her movements still hanging in the air like dust caught in sunlight. Slowly, though, normalcy began to creep back in. Dishes clattered again. Murmured conversations resumed. A couple at the window chuckled softly over their shared dessert. At the back corner of the cafe, Daniel Rivers hadn't moved. His coffee sat untouched before him, long gone cold. His son Evan was still seated across the table, now tracing soft lines along the table's wood grain with one finger. Calm. Present. Smiling now and then to himself. Daniel's eyes weren't on Evan anymore. They were on Emily. He watched her closely, not with suspicion, not exactly, but with a kind of sharp curiosity he usually reserved for evaluating executives or dissecting the pitch of a new invention. He had seen thousands of people in high-stakes environments. Watched their body language. Noted the tics that betrayed fear or manipulation. But this woman, she was unreadable. Her back was straight. Her expression relaxed. She moved with quiet purpose, not the performative kind. There was no flicker of pride in her features, no attempt to steal a glance his way, no hesitation or smugness. She hadn't done it for him. She hadn't even known who he was. A waitress named Emily, with flour still dusting her apron ties and her hair pulled into a messy bun, had seen his son, really seen him. And then she had danced. And then she had walked away. Behind the counter, one of her coworkers, a tall redhead with half-moons of eyeliner just beginning to smudge from the long shift, sidled up to her with a smirk. "Do you even know who that kid is?" she whispered, nodding subtly toward the back booth. Emily glanced over, briefly catching sight of Evan, then shook her head. "No. But I know his eyes were full of light. And that's enough for me." The redhead raised her brows. "That's Daniel Rivers' kid." Emily blinked, nonplussed. "You know," the woman continued, lowering her voice further, "the medical billionaire? The guy behind Sonova Tech? That's him. No one ever sees him in public, let alone with his kid. People say the boy's special needs, autistic, I think." Emily said nothing for a moment. Her eyes returned to the glasses in the drying rack. "I didn't do it for them," she said softly. The redhead shrugged. "Well, if you're lucky, maybe he'll tip big. Or fund your own dance company or something." Emily gave a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind them, Daniel hadn't looked away once. Not when Emily dried her hands. Not when she stepped away to greet a new customer with quiet politeness. Not when she bent to pick up a child's dropped toy at another table. She had returned to her station as if no miracle had occurred. But Daniel knew better. He had spent years and millions of dollars seeking moments like the one he had just witnessed. He had brought in specialists from across the globe, purchased the most sophisticated therapies, built his home around Evan's needs, created rooms designed for sensory harmony. And yet, none of them had done what she just had. With no tools, no training, no strategy. Just a dance. A moment of connection. And still, he said nothing. It wasn't that Daniel was ungrateful. It was that he didn't know how to say thank you for something so profound without cheapening it. He'd once told a speechwriter, "Never use 1,000 words when silence will do." Now he found himself silenced not by choice, but by awe. From across the room, Emily felt the weight of someone watching her, but she didn't turn. Her years in dance had trained her to sense presence without eye contact, to be aware of space and energy without the need to confront it. She continued her duties, grateful the shift was nearly done. Still, a flicker of doubt crept in. Had she overstepped? Would the manager think her actions unprofessional? Would the other staff whisper about her? Had she done something inappropriate, too personal for a customer? She dried another glass, placing it carefully in the rack. Then she paused, fingers resting on the counter's edge. No. She hadn't done it for attention. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because in that moment, a child had needed stillness. And movement was her first language. So she had spoken it. Daniel finally rose from his booth, gently guiding Evan by the shoulder. The boy followed without protest, still calm, still balanced in that delicate space the dance had carved open for him. As they passed the counter, Daniel looked at Emily one last time. She looked up only briefly, just enough to meet his gaze. Her eyes were not pleading, not proud, just open, honest. Daniel gave the slightest nod. Emily nodded back. And then they were gone. The following morning, the world woke up differently, at least, in the small orbit that revolved around Willow Cafe. It started with a photo. Just one image, snapped at an angle from a booth near the back. It showed Emily mid-dance, arms extended gracefully, one foot arched behind the other. The light from the front windows had caught her hair in a golden haze. In the corner of the frame, barely visible but unmistakable, sat a small boy, Evan, watching her, transfixed. Above the photo, someone had typed a headline. "Waitress performs for Billionaire's autistic son, a perfect play for attention?" It wasn't from a major outlet. Just a local blog, half gossip, half lifestyle coverage. But it had a loyal following. By mid-morning, the post had over 4,000 shares, a few hundred comments, and was starting to spill onto larger forums. The tone varied, some praising the moment as beautiful and human, others calling it staged, performative, opportunistic. Emily saw it during her lunch break, sitting in the back staff room with a tuna sandwich she no longer had an appetite for. A coworker had scrolled up to her with wide eyes and handed her a phone. She stared at the screen, the image frozen, her body caught in a moment that had felt private, sacred, even though it had taken place in public. "That's you," the girl said, in case it wasn't clear. Emily nodded, silent. She didn't read the comments. She didn't need to. Her stomach had already tightened into a knot. By 3 p.m., she was called into the manager's office. "Close the door, Emily," came the low, slightly weary voice of Mr. Talbot, the general manager. He was in his 50s, a man who cared more about the espresso machine than public relations. But even he looked nervous. She closed the door. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and tapped the printed version of the photo that now lay between them. The headline was highlighted in yellow. A red pen circled her name, added by someone at corporate, no doubt. "Look, I know you meant well," he began. "But this is a problem." Emily kept her eyes on the photo. She didn't respond. "We've been getting calls," Talbot continued. "A few reporters already showed up this morning. Corporate's worried about the optics. They don't want the cafe to be part of a social media spectacle." "I didn't ask for it," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I know you didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that it happened. And now you're associated with the most reclusive billionaire in the city. They're worried it looks like we're trying to exploit the connection." Emily took a breath. "He didn't even speak to me." "That doesn't matter," Talbot said, sounding almost apologetic. "They want to avoid any perception of unsanctioned personal behavior on the floor. Their words, not mine." Emily nodded slowly. "So, what do you want me to do?" she asked. "I need you to keep a low profile," he said. "No more gestures. No more stepping out like that. Just stick to the basics. Serve tables. No dancing. No improvising. Until this all blows over." Emily didn't argue. She didn't plead her case or explain what that moment had meant. Not to her, and certainly not to Evan. There was no point. Whatever had passed between her and the boy had been real. That was enough. Explaining it would only cheapen it. She stood. "Okay," she said. Talbot seemed relieved. "Thanks. I know this isn't easy." She didn't answer. She untied her apron slowly, placed it gently on the desk, and walked out. Her shift wasn't over. Not technically. But something inside her was. She stepped out into the alley behind the cafe, where the scent of baking bread mixed with exhaust from the delivery truck idling nearby. The sun had dipped behind the neighboring buildings, casting the alley in a cool gray shadow. Emily leaned against the brick wall and closed her eyes. She hadn't cried yet. Not out of pride, but because the moment didn't deserve tears. It deserved silence. She didn't know that miles away, in a sleek penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Daniel Rivers was scrolling through the same article. He didn't follow blogs. Didn't keep up with viral stories. But his assistant had forwarded it with the subject line, "You'll want to see this." He clicked it. And there she was. Emily. Frozen in movement. And Evan, his son, visible at the edge of the frame. Calm. Focused. Safe. Daniel read the headline. His jaw tightened. He didn't read the comments either. He didn't need to. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his chest, and stared out the glass wall of his office. It was all wrong. They had misunderstood. Distorted something beautiful. They always did. And yet, he hadn't stopped it. Hadn't spoken to her. Hadn't thanked her. She had given Evan something no one else had, connection, unfiltered, untrained. And now she was paying for it. He turned his phone face down on the desk. Then he got up and left the room. The cafe was quieter than usual that afternoon. The lull between the lunch and dinner rush always made the place feel almost intimate, like the walls themselves were catching their breath. Emily walked in slowly, not in uniform, not with her usual tied apron and quick step. She wore a simple blue cardigan, her hair down for once, soft waves brushing her shoulders. There was no tray in her hands, no notepad in her pocket, only a canvas tote over her arm and a single reason for returning, to gather her personal things. Her locker in the back room held little: some hand lotion, a worn paperback, and a photo of her and her younger brother at the lake. It wouldn't take long. She didn't expect to see Mr. Talbot standing near the counter, arms folded, a somber expression on his face. He was alone. The staff must have been on their scheduled break. For once, no one was watching. Emily offered him a polite nod. "Just here to grab my stuff." "I figured," Talbot said, clearing his throat. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something folded, a piece of cream-colored stationery, double-folded, thick and clean. He held it between two fingers, extended it toward her like an offering. "This came about 20 minutes after you left yesterday. A courier dropped it off. It's addressed to you." Emily blinked. She didn't reach for it immediately. "From who?" Talbot shrugged. "Didn't say. But I think you'll figure it out." She took the paper, fingertips brushing the manager's just briefly. It was warm from his hand, the faintest scent of cedar clinging to the fibers. She turned it over. No name on the outside. Just her first name, written in an elegant masculine hand. Emily. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a single paragraph, handwritten in blue ink. "I've hired 5 of the best specialists in the country. For 2 years, they've worked with my son. None of them ever made him smile. You did." With silence. "If you're willing, I'd like to invite you to become the Director of Emotional Arts Initiatives for Children with Special Needs, under my family foundation. Because I believe not everyone knows how to listen with their ears. But you listened with your body." Daniel Rivers. She stared at the words. "Then read them again. And again." The letters blurred just slightly as her breath caught in her chest. Something tightened behind her ribs, a soft clench of disbelief, then recognition, then something so much deeper, release. A small sound escaped her, something between a gasp and a sigh. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She folded the note carefully and pressed it to her chest, her fingers trembling as they held it there. Her eyes burned, but she refused to blink them clear. She turned away from Mr. Talbot, stepping behind the counter, not to serve, not to work, but simply because her legs needed somewhere to go. Her hands instinctively found the edge of the lemon water station, the same place she had wiped down so many afternoons before. She gripped the counter and lowered her head. The tears came quietly. Not the kind that collapse a person with sobs or shake their shoulders with pain. No. These were soft, silent tears. Tears of being seen. Of being acknowledged. Of something she thought she'd buried, her gift, her language, her purpose, being called back to life with a handwritten note. Talbot didn't interrupt. He stayed behind the register, hands folded, eyes respectfully cast downward. Finally, after a moment, Emily straightened. She wiped her eyes gently, then her nose, then tucked the note into the pocket of her cardigan with great care. "He didn't have to," she said, voice hoarse. "No," Talbot replied. "But he did." She smiled, more with her eyes than her mouth. "I used to dance in front of full theaters," she said softly, almost to herself. "But no one ever wrote me anything like that." There was nothing more to say. She walked to the back, retrieved her tote and the few items from her locker, then paused by the staff door one last time. Her gaze fell on the place near the counter where she had first started to dance. It was empty now. Just tile and shadow. But something sacred had happened there. She stepped outside into the fading light of afternoon. Inside her pocket, the the note rested gently against her chest. And with it, the first spark of a new chapter. 2 months later, the room smelled faintly of clay and watercolor. It was a converted studio, once an unused wing of a community arts center, now quietly reborn into a classroom unlike any other. The program, newly launched and quietly funded by the Rivers Family Foundation, was called Silent Motion. 6 children sat scattered on the floor, each in their own little pocket of space, each carrying stories too large for their small frames to speak aloud. Some rocked gently. One hummed. A girl near the back clutched a threadbare plush rabbit to her chest like a life preserver. None of them made eye contact. None of them spoke. And that was okay. Emily stood at the front of the room. No clipboard. No speech. No introductions. Just her breath. And her body. She looked at each child, without expectation, without pressure, then slowly lifted her right hand to her chest. She laid it flat, fingers splayed softly over her heart. Then she extended it outward, palm open, slow and steady, as if releasing something invisible into the air. Then again, left hand to chest, then forward. Like wings unfurling. Like trust made visible. She moved with intention, not to impress, but to invite. No one told the children what to do. No instructions. No prompts. Just space. In the quiet, the room pulsed with presence. And then from the farthest corner, a small figure stepped forward. Evan. He had been there the whole time, seated apart from the others, just as quiet as the day at the cafe. But something was different now. His posture was straighter. His hands weren't circling spoons or drawing patterns in the carpet. He was watching her. And now, he moved. He didn't rush. His steps were slow, tentative. But there was no fear. He walked toward Emily and stopped just a few feet away. Then, in perfect silence, he raised his own hand to his chest. Just like hers. He extended it outward. Then the other hand. Emily didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She only mirrored him, matching his rhythm, breathing with him, letting the moment carry them both. They danced. No music. No choreography. Just a flow of motion, like leaves following a current neither could see, yet both understood. The other children watched. One boy leaned forward. The girl with the rabbit pressed it closer but didn't look away. At the door, Daniel stood quietly, unnoticed by the others, his hand gripping the frame. He had seen many miracles in his lifetime, scientific breakthroughs, life-saving innovations, lives transformed by technology. But none of them looked like this. This was stillness in motion. Language without words. Connection without condition. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched. And as he did, something in him softened, something long guarded, long armored by the pressures of fatherhood, by the isolation of wealth, by the helplessness of not knowing how to reach his own son. Now, he saw the truth. His son didn't need fixing. He needed someone who could listen differently. Emily hadn't changed Evan. She had created space where he could be exactly who he was, and still be met. As the dance slowed to a gentle stop, Evan turned his head toward his father. Just a glance. But it was enough. Daniel blinked hard. Emily looked over and gave a small nod. Not a performance bow. Just a silent acknowledgement that they had arrived, together, at a place words could never take them. There are moments in life that don't need words. Moments when connection happens, not through speeches or instructions, but through presence. Through silence. Through the quiet, steady heartbeat of someone who simply chooses to stay. This story isn't just about a waitress or a boy with special needs. It's about the quiet power of recognizing another human being, not for what they should be, but for who they already are. In a world that often values noise, performance, and polished results, Emily chose something else. She didn't try to fix. She didn't try to teach. She didn't try to impress. She simply responded, with grace and stillness, to a child's distress. And in doing so, she created something most of us forget to offer: safety. Evan, a boy many had labeled as unreachable, responded not to therapy or wealth or technology, but to stillness, to a gesture, to a moment of human truth. And Daniel, a father who had given everything but still carried the ache of disconnection, finally saw something greater than any expert could provide: the courage of a stranger who chose to see his son not as a problem to solve, but as a soul to meet. That is the lesson. We don't always need answers. Sometimes, what the people around us need most is our quiet presence, our willingness to kneel beside them, without needing to be right or to be noticed. To listen not just with our ears, but with our whole being. In our older years, it's easy to feel that the world has become louder, faster, more disconnected. But perhaps what we have, what we can give, is something even more precious: the ability to slow down, to truly notice, to offer understanding, without needing to speak at all. So, if you ever wonder whether your presence matters, if you question whether one small act of kindness, done without fanfare, can really change anything, let this story remind you: sometimes, a silent gesture says more than 1,000 words. And sometimes, the quietest people leave the loudest echoes in our hearts. If you believe that silence can be a form of compassion, if you believe that true art comes from the heart, not the stage, then go ahead. Because moments like these deserve to be remembered, deserve to be told. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We'll see you again next time.